Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tearing down NVIDIA's absolutely staggering third quarter earnings report. We're going to look at the numbers and the commentary straight from the source to really understand the engine that is powering this whole AI revolution. Okay, let's just dive right in. We're starting with the shockwave, the headline numbers that didn't just beat expectations, they completely reset them. The first number you have to see is $57 billion for one quarter. Now, to give you some context here, analysts were thinking somewhere around $55 billion. So that's a $2 billion surprise. It signals that something truly extraordinary is happening with demand right now. And this slide right here, it just perfectly illustrates the sheer velocity of that growth. Look at that jump. Revenue is up a massive 62% from a year ago and 22% from just the last quarter. Think about that. That's nearly $11 billion of new revenue in just 3 months. Insane. So what's actually driving this engine? Well, the answer is overwhelmingly the data center business. At $51.2 billion, it's not just the biggest piece of the pie. It practically is the entire pie, making up almost 90% of all the revenue. So that brings us inside the engine room, right? Let's take a look at the specific parts of the data center that are generating all this power, because this is literally where the AI revolution is being built. The data center business all by itself pulled in a record $51.2 billion. That is a 66% jump from the year before, and it's all fueled by what seems to be a totally insatiable demand for AI infrastructure from the biggest companies in the world. The CEO, Jensen Huang, he doesn't really mince words here. He says the demand for their new Blackwell platform is just astronomical. He even said the clouds are sold out, which means the big cloud providers who ran out all these GPUs, they just can't get enough of them to keep up with their customers. And you can see customers are shifting to this newer, more powerful stuff incredibly fast. The last generation Hopper is still selling, sure, but the next gen Blackwell platform is already taking over. And you gotta understand, this isn't just some small upgrade. It's a massive leap in performance. It lets companies train the next wave of these huge AI models way faster and much more efficiently. Now, this slide is super important because it really explains NVIDIA's deep strategic advantage. It's called CUDA, and it isn't just software, it's this whole ecosystem that millions of developers have been building on for years. This creates what they call a moat. It makes it incredibly hard, not to mention expensive, for customers to just switch over to a competitor's hardware, even if it's a little cheaper. So all this massive revenue growth, it brings us to the fuel for the engine, the incredible profitability. This is what underpins the company's really ambitious long-term vision. Right, so NVIDIA isn't just growing, it's a profitability powerhouse, a gross margin of nearly 74%. What that means is the company keeps almost 74 cents of every single dollar that comes in after paying for the parts to make its products. For a hardware company, that is just an astonishingly high number. And to kind of push back on all the talk about an AI bubble, the CEO laid out this long-term vision. He argues we're not just in one trend, but 3 massive tech shifts all happening at once. First, the move to accelerated computing with GPUs. Second, the explosion of generative AI. And third, the next frontier, Agentic AI. And you should think of these as AI systems that don't just respond. They can actually reason, plan, and use tools to get complex things done all on their own. He sees this as a whole new industrial revolution, not some short-term boom. All right, so now let's look at the road ahead. The company has a really strong forecast, but it's also facing some pretty significant potential roadblocks. And yeah, the growth is not stopping. The company is projecting an even bigger fourth quarter. They're forecasting revenue to hit an absolutely eye-watering $65 billion. That's another $8 billion of growth on top of this record quarter we're talking about right now. But the path forward isn't all clear. The company was very open about several headwinds they're trying to navigate. So what are the key risks here? So they mentioned a few key things. First, geopolitical stuff is a huge factor. Because of trade restrictions, management said that some really sizable purchase orders from China just never happened. And now they're assuming 0 data center revenue from that whole region next quarter. They're also dealing with rising component costs and trying to manage this incredibly complex global supply chain just to keep up with the explosive demand. Okay, so let's pull all this together. What is the big picture here? Let's just summarize the key takeaways from this really historic quarter. When you just look at the numbers, NVIDIA blew past expectations on every single key metric. From the total revenue and that all-important data center number to their earnings per share, and then their guidance for the future, it was just a clean sweep against what all the analysts were expecting. The core story here is simple: overwhelming demand driven by a fundamental shift in technology. The company isn't just selling everything it can make. The demand is still way higher than their supply. And looking ahead, management sees a staggering $500 billion revenue opportunity that they think is visible just through the end of 2026. And all of this leaves us with the central question that pretty much everyone is debating right now. Are these numbers the peak of some temporary, overheated market? Or, as the company argues, are we just watching the ground floor of a new industrial revolution being built in real time? That is the big question to think about.